right, good evening and welcome everyone to our first ever Versus Conversation. This is a community forum where we bring in experts from inside of our community to give us more information on the things that we don't know that are affecting us every day. So we all know that we are in the midst of a pandemic with COVID-19. And we also know that a lot of the deaths that we are seeing are among our Black and brown people. And so tonight we're going to have a conversation about wills and trust and real estate and DBEs for small business owners. And we're really going to get into the legal aspect of these things. Oftentimes we find that we don't take care of these matters until we're up against the wall and it's time for us to experience them. And so with Versus, we want to begin to have those conversations before these things present themselves. And so tonight, I really want, and I encourage everyone to grab your paper and your pen. Send in your questions if you have any, and we will get them all answered. And so without any further ado, Michael, would you like to, Mr. Lewis, who's created this initiative, I want him to first explain how he came up with the title of Versus, what Versus stands for, and what his expectations are around this conversation. So, Mr. Lewis?
Thank you, Ms. Hurd. I want to thank you all for actually being present virtually and in person. I'd like to thank my three presenters. First, behind me on the screen, who's via Zoom, is Judge Sandra Cabrina Jenkins. To my right is Attorney Shalise Harrison, and to my left, who's gonna take this title, Attorney Kimberly Thomas, along with my moderator, Andrea Hurd. So, what is Versus? Versus is a community conversation to uncover the underlying effects of systemic racism that are plaguing us as Black and brown people. This is something that has spawned to me during this pandemic time, where I noticed that the disinformation of us not really realizing how systemic racism really affects us, it needed to be uncovered. We need to speak out loud. We need to talk to experts that live in professions where they can give us examples on how we can educate ourselves so we can be better prepared. So the forum itself is going to be a continuous forum the second Tuesday of every month, live here at the Algiers Auditorium or at other venues around the city. Presenters will be not only local, but I do have presenters that will be national. Today's discussion will be covering wills and trusts, estate planning, DBEs, criminal law reform, and in general, it's going to be just conversation on systemic racism from other aspects as well. Like Dre just said, or as Ms. Hurd just said, I encourage you all to actually take pen and paper and write down this information. This will be recorded. Versus does now have a YouTube channel, and eventually we'll have other forms to sustain this type of content. So I encourage you to take pen and paper, ask us questions virtually through everyone's here streaming, so we can get these questions answered here live. We do have a moderator and moderators behind the scenes as well. So without further ado, I'd like to thank you all for being present. Love you all for this, because I don't know, this is something that, again, I see really benefiting us all bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. You know, you give people the microphone and then they get excited and they want to talk.
So excited.
So without any further ado, we're going to begin our conversation. And we're actually going to begin with Judge Sandra Cabrina Jenkins, who is live via Zoom. Wave at everyone. Hey. So she is our virtual speaker, and she's going to begin our presentation and tell us first a little bit more about yourself and your experience in your law practice, and then just begin to give us our plethora of knowledge that you have for us on the night.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to join this panel of women. And I'm excited that Michael Lewis decided to include me in his vision, especially with this being the inaugural dialogue with the community. I am Sandra Cabrina Jenkins. I serve on the Louisiana 4th Circuit Court of Appeal. I'm in my 8th year. And prior to that, I practiced law for 23 years as a criminal defense attorney, and initially right out of law school, I was an assistant district attorney in Orleans Parish. My entire career prior to taking the bench, it was criminal law, and mostly as a defense attorney. I had the opportunity to serve in many capacities in my community with pro bono work, with working with our youth, working with women. And once I became a judge, I kind of missed that opportunity because we have certain restrictions, once we take that oath of office, and we always have to present ourselves in such a way where we don't appear as if we're advocates, nor we don't want to give the public any type of concern as to whether we can be fair and impartial. So we are able to volunteer in certain organizations, and I find myself gravitating back to youth, particularly working with women that have found themselves in situations where they have experienced violence. And in 2015, I began what I call my law camps, and that allowed me to address some of the issues from the viewpoint of a jurist, as well as a minister, as well as a former criminal defense attorney that had that background and experience with working with persons that found themselves in the criminal justice system. So what I wanted to talk about tonight a little bit, and I'm gonna start off with a lot of history because we are in a climate right now where everybody now wants to, I think in a good way, pay attention to what is going on with our judicial system, what is going on with our legislative process in Congress, as well as statewide and in local government. And we see all these movements headed by young people, and we see these movements are having great effect. I've never seen in my, what am I, I'm 59, no. Yes, I'm 59. Sorry about that. In my 59 years, I have never seen corporate America stand up the way it has and supported a movement for a black cause rather. So let me go into how many people think or are suspicious of the judicial system, and it has to do with our history and what happened after the period of slavery. I'll start off with saying that the judiciary is responsible for imparting justice, and in order to impart justice, we have to comply with our constitutions, our statutes, and our interpretation. But the buzzwords that we've been hearing in this last administration, the Trump administration, is rule of law. And what we've been hearing about rule of law is that the president does not comply with that. The president decides that there are things that he wants to do that an executive cannot do. So our country is based upon rules, laws, and the judiciary is to respect and honor the rule of law. When we don't have that structure, then we have chaos. So the question comes then, when is it that the court can stray away in layman terms and not comply or not apply the traditional interpretation of law that we are used to? And I know I have all these lawyers sitting before me. So let's look back at when slavery ended and the economic stress that it had on our country. And what happened, because there was not that free labor anymore, there had to be created a system where they could have free labor. So there were very oppressive laws that were introduced, I mean, minor things, and we've heard about, and some of those laws are still there, spitting on the sidewalk, getting 6 months for vagrancy. And what happened when those persons were incarcerated, they were forced to work. And I'm gonna read you, some legislation. This was back in 1865. They created, a Board of Control of Louisiana Penitentiary, and the legislature declared, prisoners shall be made to labor from sunrise to sunset throughout the year, and shall be employed exclusively in rebuilding and repairing the prison, the manufacture of brick, such cotton and woolen stuffs as prevent machinery can make, such mechanical pursuits as necessary for the use of prison, and if the Board of Control deem it proper, a tannery may be established and operated within the enclosure. So what happened is the legislature came up with laws that said, this is what's gonna happen, we can arrest a person for this, and we can keep them in prison for this long, but while they're in prison, they're gonna continue to help us create and build our infrastructure. So when we fast forward to today, we begin to look and think about if that looks familiar. This was in 1865. And the arguments towards the bail bond issue, a lot of people are in the position of arguing that it is not necessary to have bail. Why is it necessary? It's an oppressive mechanism to have someone incarcerated pre-trial when there has been no finding of guilt. So some of the very beginnings of how our court system began to implement its policy and make decisions on who will be held in jail and how can they get out of jail came from law that was established right after slavery, as well as during Jim Crow. And when the US Supreme Court or Louisiana Supreme Court or any court has to make a determination on if a law is unconstitutional, one of the things it has to do is look at the history of the law. What was the legislative intent? And there are two recent instances in our state of Louisiana. The most recent one is Ramos versus Louisiana, where the US Supreme Court declared that a non-unanimous jury verdict, a 10-2 verdict, is unconstitutional, so that conviction cannot stand. A couple of years back, we voted as a state to have unanimous juries, so the very next step was for the Supreme Court US Supreme Court to act and rule upon the constitutionality of that. So you also have the issue with persons that are incarcerated, as I mentioned earlier, for an extensive period of time without bail or without bond. And the US Fifth Circuit has declared, I think a few years ago, that the criminal district court in Orleans Parish could not be the executioner, meaning that the judge is the one that sentences the defendant. The court system is the one that collects the money for fines and fees, and then the court can implement penalties or revoke the probation of that person and have that person serve a sentence. So the US Fifth Circuit said that you can't be all of that, judges, you can't be all of that criminal justice system. So it has taken a while for our courts to honestly begin to look at the historical beginnings of why these laws were implemented. Now, I'm talking about that history, and it may sound gloom, it may sound that it's intentional, but when we are in a society and we begin to do things because it's custom, it's tradition, and then it becomes law, we begin to dig ourselves into a system, and that's why we can talk about systemic racism or systemic bias, because it has been ingrained in our society. And I would say within the last 7 to 8 years with the Criminal Justice Reform Act that the Supreme Court of our state has been very active with, particularly our Chief Justice, Burnett Joshua Johnson, we have seen great moves in criminal justice reform. We have seen where certain mandatory minimums have been removed from legislation. We have seen where there's more of a freedom for judges to sentence. And when you look at the history of sentencing, the legislature didn't trust the judiciary, so it decided that it wanted to have more control, in my opinion, is my interpretation, more control over judges. So that's when you saw the mandatory minimums being imposed, where judges did not have that much of a discretion to go beyond that. So I'm gonna stop there. If there are any questions, and I know Michael may or may not have questions right now, but I do want to say that our society can have faith in our judicial system. I do believe that our judicial system is one that does follow the rule of law. I do believe that when there are wrongs that have been institutionalized for so many years, we've seen a peeling off of the layers of those wrongs. And it may seem like it's taken a long time, and this is 2020, and Louisiana is one of the last 2 states that has allowed a unanimous verdict to stand. And the history behind that as well is that they wanted to dilute the power of Black jurors, and they felt that if they had at least 1 or 2 white persons on the jury or Black persons, on the jury, that they could run into the danger of not getting a conviction. So that was one of the underlying reasons for the law in Louisiana. And in 2020, we finally have a ruling that says that that's unconstitutional. So again, Michael, I appreciate this opportunity. If there are other questions or something else that you want me to touch on before we go to the next panelist, I'll be more than happy to do that. Thank you.
So I'm gonna jump in, Judge Jenkins, so that I make sure that we all understand what it is that we're listening to. So,
okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, so you're saying that in history, this was done, the systemic part of incarcerating individuals after slavery, it was still created to be a part of the system. But now, if we fast forward to 2020, if we look at the legal system and the judiciary system, that we are making progress. Is that what you're saying? Is that what I'm to understand?
We are making progress, but the interesting and a little sad part is that when you look at where we started from and how these things begin to be ingrained in our system, and some of the things that are changing or are happening within these last 3 to 5 years, then we have to start wondering what is it that that's in the system have not been observing, or what is it that we can do to make sure that we don't perpetuate an oppressive system and create such an aura about the judiciary where we're not trusted and where our integrity is being questioned.
Okay, I see. So basically, don't add to it.
Correct. Don't, I like to say I refuse to perpetuate wrong. A lot of times we don't have discretion in the law. However, it doesn't give us an inability, or it doesn't cripple us rather, to where we can. For example, I'm an appellate court judge, so
Right.
I have the right to dissent, because we sit in panels of 3 or 5 or 12. So it's not like we all have to agree. If we see something, or if our interpretation is a little bit different than the majority of our panel, then we have that right to do so. And you find out, especially with a lot of civil rights legislation, you find that many of the dissents were finally adopted and became the dominant opinion and became the law, and that portion of that racism or institutional racism or bias finally start to dwindle away.
Okay, I have an internet question. I know I just shocked everybody. But I know your time is limited today, Judge Jenkins, and I appreciate you.
Fine for now.
Okay, so I have a question. Someone asked, how do we change the laws that have been outdated?
How can we change the laws that have been outdated? Well, it's a process even for us as citizens. One of the things, first of all, we have to pay attention to what's going on in our legislature. Every spring, usually about March or April, we have a legislative session. And we can easily find out what bills are being introduced. We can easily ourselves talk to our legislators and say, this is something I have a concern about. And we can show up at the committee meeting here. We can voice our opinions. We can tell our elected officials how this particular law is impacting our communities, how we think that is harming our community and why. And that's how a lot of legislation is drafted. That's how a lot of law is repealed. So from that beginning of us being active as citizens, and then the next step is in voting. We can't sit back and say, I'm gonna only vote in a senatorial and presidential election. We can't make a decision that this election is too small. Every time something is on the ballot, we should be there voting. We should be there researching to find out what is it that this person has to offer that's gonna make our society better. So it really does start with us. And I do believe in advocacy. I do believe in peaceful protest. I think that a lot of times there is a disappointment in the system, a disappointment maybe in judges, because people feel that we are being harsh or we're not doing what we can to help the community. But like I said, the laws that are in place, we are obligated to comply in interpretation of those laws and implementation of those laws when those issues come before us.
Right. So thank you so much, Judge Jenkins. So I have another question coming from another one of our panelists, actually. Ms. Kim, you want to go ahead?
Yes, I have a question. When we are talking about a jury pool of our peers, a lot of times people are deterred from actually being active jurors because of the amount of time, the process that it takes for them to get selected, and the amount of money as far as compensation. I want to say it was like $25 a day or something to that effect. How can we as a community kind of pull together to encourage at least some type of pool, or what needs to happen legislatively? Does there need to be a voting on a check-in as far as people that are available to be a part of a juror pool? Because what we sometimes see is that once people get to trial on major cases, there's not a jury of their peers that are there. What can we do to kind of change that particular system?
Well, that's a great question, and this is a great opportunity for there to be reform in that area, because now many jurisdictions cannot determine when we can even start jury trials again because of social distancing, because of the contagiousness of COVID-19. So I think that the judiciary is in a great position of reform, is in a great position of reassessing whether or not there is honestly access to justice. And there are horror stories I hear from people that have to go to jury duty, the time that you have to wait. There are some jurisdictions that allow you to check in, you can go online, but every jurisdiction across the state has not advanced to that. So as it relates to a jury of your peers, that's a great, or not argument, but observation. And many times in criminal district court, you don't have a jury of your peers because those persons that are accused are young adults, probably between 18, 25, 26, if you want to take an average age. And the jurors that come in, they're not, first of all, in that age group. Second, they are not necessarily from the neighborhood where that person grew up. Third, they don't have the same life experiences. So it's always been an argument and a question as to whether or not there truthfully is a jury of our peers. In one of our neighboring cities, there was an issue of an intentional selection of jurors, taking out certain age groups and only sending out notices to another age group. So that's definitely a constitutional violation. And when we begin to continue to speak up and let our judicial officers know that this is a problem for us, then perhaps we will see that change. And like I said, this is the perfect time to watch and hear and see if maybe there are some open meetings or comment from the public as to how we can make our jury system a lot better and a lot more comfortable for our citizens.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis has one more question.
Just one more question, before we move on to our next panelist. Off camera, you and I spoke about early voting registration, or the way that, like, especially in this time, how absentee, well, I'm gonna let you elaborate, you know the question I'm trying to ask. Can you
Yes.
explain to the folks how they do the process of having their vote counted during this election if they're elected to do a mail-in vote, a mail-in ballot?
Right, we're in such an interesting situation in our community. Everything is just kind of, I don't wanna say it's turned upside down, but it's not the norm, it's not what we're used to. And one of the things I have been concerned with, and my mother is 80 years old, and there are times when she says she doesn't feel well, and she didn't go to vote, and I was just like, oh my God, she never ever did that before. But we have even more of our population that's not 80, that's not 65, that have been affected by COVID-19. And the Secretary of State has, is allowing us, the state of Louisiana, like I said, the Secretary of State, I'm sorry, the state of Louisiana is allowing mail-in voting based specifically on COVID-19. There are absentee ballots and reasons to vote absentee outside of COVID-19, but I'm talking only about those persons that are ill, or those persons that are recovering, or even those persons that are caregivers to someone that is healing and recovering from COVID-19. You can go to the Louisiana Secretary of State's website, and it lists all of the reasons why, or the eligibility criteria. And it's very simple. You can fill out the application online, or you can print it out, you can fax it back, you can mail it back, you can hand deliver it. So if you know persons, first of all, that are over 65 and older, they don't have to be ill. Second, if you know persons that are vulnerable, in that vulnerable population for COVID-19, they have the right to request a mail-in ballot. There are deadlines for requesting that ballot. If I'm not mistaken, October 30th is the last day to request, and then November 2nd at 4:30 p.m. is the last day to get it back to the Register of Voters. So, you all that are listening, you all that are here in the room, we can be our own committee of letting our family, our friends, and our neighbors know that you don't have to miss out on this vote because of COVID-19. You can still
Right.
vote. You will get the ballot in your home the same. It's gonna look just the same as if you had gone into the machine to push the button, and you can comfortably receive it by mail, and you can comfortably put it back in the mail and have your vote counted.
Thank you so much for that. So there is, guys, if you are listening, yes, a round of applause. I'm sorry, I'm talking. So guys, as you can see, there's no excuse as to why we should not be voting this fall. Thank you so much, Judge Jenkins, for all of your information. I'm going to now introduce our next panelist, who also wants to give us some great input in regards to kind of what's going on within COVID-19 in regards to the legal system. So Miss Shalise Harrison is here with us. Wave at everybody, Miss Shalise. And she works with founded Harrison Law and Associates, LLC, and she has been in the legal system for over 20 years. She's also on our ballot this fall. So we want to welcome her and move right along with our conversation.
Good evening, everyone, and I'm glad to be here. I'm going to be talking to you tonight about wills and trusts.
We're doing all right.
We're
We're doing all right.
We're keeping it clean.
Yes.
We're keeping it
I'm
clean.
going to be talking to you this evening about wills and trusts and how important they are. Many times in our community, we don't put our affairs in order, and we find out at the last minute we're trying to, or it's too late in getting wills done. So tonight I'm going to explain to you what a will is and the reasons we should be doing wills. So a will is simply your last words to your family members, explaining to them what you want to do with your property, even simple as thing as, you know, how I want to be laid out in the coffin, what I want to wear. You don't necessarily have to have property to leave a will. It's your last will and testament. It's the last time you'll be able to speak to your loved ones. It doesn't have to be detailed. You can basically say, I leave my daughter or my sister my wedding ring. Or you can say, I leave 50% of my property to my daughter. Or I leave my other 50% to my sister. So it really comes into play when you have multiple families. If you have multiple family, say you've been married before and your spouse have children and you don't have any children, it can be very important to do a will because you want to make sure that if you want to leave your wife your interest in the community property that you have purchased with her, that you leave a will, because if you fail to leave a will, that person who you're married to would get, their children would get their 50%, and you would be in property with someone who already had with their 50%, and that can be a problem, especially when you have family members who don't get along. You may, there's constantly times when, can I put this down? Can y'all hear me?
Switch the mic, switch the mic.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, that's fine.
So what,
Yeah.
because I hate speaking in mics,
We can hear you on the
so a lot of times, we have problems, I have problems where people come to me where, again, there's husband and wives who've been married before. And they want to make sure that when they die, that their new spouse will get their interest in the property and not their children, because they don't want there to be any issues with that. So it's very important that when you have that type of situation, that you do a will. You can, in Louisiana, we have two types of will. We have the type of will where you can actually write your will out. It has to be solely written in the testator's handwriting. That means and signed and dated. Dated at the end, and it has to be, so for instance, if today is August 15th, it has to be August 15, 2020. Because as you know, one of the issues that we're having with dating with 2020, some people are not putting 2020 behind it. You have to make sure, because if you do a will this year and you only put 20, we're not gonna know exactly when that will was done, especially if it's handwritten. It has to be solely written by you in your handwriting, dated and signed at the end. And if you don't do that, then unfortunately, even though it's a handwritten will, it will be invalidated. The second type of will that we have in New Orleans is a notarial will, where you actually it would be typed or written, and it has to be notarized and witnessed by two witnesses. And those are the two type of wills that we basically do in New Orleans. So you can either do your holographic will, or you can do a notarial will. That is one of the main types of wills that we do here in New Orleans. The reason, again, you want desire to name and God. One of the reasons you want to do also a will is if you have minor children. Minor children, you want to have the right to say who's going to be the guardian over your child. A lot of times, people, unfortunately, they die without a will and they leave children. And you want to have a say in who has guardianship over your child. Because if you don't leave a will, then the court is gonna make a decision on who will be your child's guardian. And if you want a particular person who you trust to be to take care of your child, you want to make sure that you have that will in place so that that child will be taken care of by the person that you have in place. So we went through the types of wills.
I'm gonna cut in really quickly, Ms. Shalice, because I have a question.
So most times we think about doing a will when we are older, when we are elderly. And so at what time do you suggest? Do you suggest doing a will, especially if you have children? Or do you suggest doing a will at 20, at 25? Is there a certain age that we should begin to write out our wills?
No, there's no special age. I mean, as soon as I would say, become adult of working age, and especially if you have a child at that time, I think it's important that you put a will in place again, because you want you want to be able to talk about who should be your child's guardian.
Okay, thank you. And also, thinking about getting with our loved ones, or maybe writing out our will if we hadn't done so with ourselves, how do you recommend or suggest to people to bring up that conversation? Because I know a lot of us, we think we scurry away from writing our will or even talking about death. So are there any suggestions that you can give us for maybe breaking the ice for that conversation, or asking our parents or asking one another about it?
Well, I just.
They're saying the volume's low, so we gotta talk a little louder
Okay.
on these, yeah.
Well, one of the reasons why you want to have the conversation is it just makes it easier for the family. If you sit down with your mother and your father and just explain to them that, hey, we need you to do this for us, because it's going to make it better for us that you sit down here and do a will and tell us what you want. Because there's so many times when families bicker over property. And it's just an issue. And if we can get the parents to sit down and talk to their children about it, it just makes it a whole lot easier for the family.
Okay, guys, so listen. So Ms. Jenkins is telling us not to shy away from writing our wills or even having conversations about it. Ultimately, we know that we are living beings, and one day we will not be here. There will be no more breath in our bodies. And because we've had so many discrepancies with families, with issues with who gets what and what part of the house goes where, you want to eliminate part of that conversation. And by doing that, you have this conversation. You have the conversation around the wills, but not only do you just have the conversation, you document it. And so if I'm understanding correctly, you said that if I wanted to write out my will, I could write it out in my handwriting, and at the very end of it, sign my name, first, middle, last, date it, make sure that if I'm doing it in 2020, that I say that the year is 2020, and it will be a valid binding document
Yes.
that I just need to put somewhere safe and that
Yes.
everybody knows?
Yes.
Okay, so how do we know that I wrote it? How do we know?
Well, one of the things that I go out to seniors and I talk to them about doing their wills. And I tell them to I give them a folder. And it says on top of that folder, the state of, and it has their name. And it's a red folder, so it sticks out.
Okay.
For when the family members are looking for papers. And that way it'll have their will in it, and any other documentations like their insurance policies. They put it all, I make sure that they put everything together. So when their family members get the folder, it'll have all the information for them and they don't have to go looking for it.
Awesome, that's an excellent idea, guys. Make sure that y'all write that down in y'all's notes. Thank you, Ms. Jenkins.
I'm sorry.
Harris. Where am I?
Harrison.
And one of the things is you want to make sure you revise your will at least every 5 years. You want to revise it when your assets change. You want to revise it if you get a divorce, if you have a child, or you become widowed. So if your husband died, you want to make sure you update your will. Not only just your will, make sure you update your insurance policies, because that is a big issue. I've had clients come to me where the husband had been, and the wife had been divorced about 6 years. And when he actually wound up dropping dead while running, and the insurance policy still had his ex-wife on it. So she was responsible for actually burying him.
Wow.
Because she was on the insurance policy, and the kids were at the mercy of her, and they weren't her kids.
Wow.
Yes.
So every
That's
time
very-
something changes,
Make sure you update your will and your insurance policies if necessary.
got it.
One thing I think people don't talk about that actually really needs to be kind of highlighted in business is if you are a sole proprietor of any type of business, can you expound a little bit how a will or any type of successions, especially when it's dealing with bank accounts, money, and things of that nature, how an actual will help the business partners and for the succession afterwards?
Right, because what happens is, because the community, you have community property. And if the will is silent as to if the partner is supposed to regain full control of the company, the wife comes in because it's half of her, that's considered community property, so she comes in as a partner in the company. So that's why wills as well as the trust works well for that, because you can set up where the company would be put in trust, that the interest, and the partner the other person can actually run the business. So that is very important, because you have where a wife or a husband doesn't know anything about the business, but now they've inherited this business and they're a partner in it. So it's very important to also put that in your will.
Wow, okay, so that means my business owners out here, make sure that you have that in order. You're putting that in your notes, you're putting that in your guidelines, or you are working with your partner I would just suggest, like you said, to make sure that you write it down and it's spelled out so that everybody's clear and so that everybody knows their part.
Exactly.
And can you tell people what is the consequence, especially when it comes to assets, any type of businesses, as far as their assets, money and things, what happens when your affairs are not in order? Because I want them to hear it from you of what happens from the bank perspective when someone may die and they don't have a will or anything like that. What are the effects of yes.
Okay, so you can't get to the bank accounts. So you have to go to succession first before, so if someone dies and you need to get to their bank account, you can't. The bank does not, they won't even tell you what's in the bank. So you have to then go to an attorney, file the succession paperwork, then have someone appointed as an independent administrator or as an administrator. That administrator then can take the paperwork that we file with the court to the bank, and then they will give them the information. But by this time, a lot of things have happened. They're needing to, bury their loved one, but they can't get to the money. So that's another thing. It's very important. So if you have that will, you can get it done, and it just goes a little smoother than not having it.
That's after having the death certificate and everything else.
Right. Well, one of the things with the law now is that if you either have the death certificate or you can have affidavit of domicile and heirship, and if two people attest to that, then the death certificate is needed. So you can move a little quicker without waiting on the death certificates, because right now death certificates are taking a while to get to get in front of the
Via COVID?
Mhm.
Do we have any more questions before she continues her presentation?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis in the back.
There are teachers across the country who are returning to work, and many of them are being asked to create wills
Yes.
due to the COVID environment.
Yes.
So I have like a two-part question. One, what advice would you give them? And then two, we are in a humble profession. About how much would it cost for them to get the will drawn up by a legal professional?
Okay, now.
Should I repeat the question so
Yeah,
everyone
just
can hear it?
repeat it.
so they can
Okay, so we had a question from the audience, and the audience member is an educator, are you?
Yes.
So, she asked, teachers across the profession are being asked to draw up their wills because they are going back to school via COVID-19. How do they do that? As well as who could draw up that will? Is that right?
Yes. How much is it?
And how much does it cost is the question.
Okay, if I was you, I would seek legal, an attorney to draft your will to make sure that you're putting everything in there that you need to. And it all depends on who you hire to do the will. It can cost you anywhere, I would think, from $250 to $500 for someone to draft your will for you.
Could teachers, as you said, draw up their own
They
signed,
can do the
dated?
holographic will, of course.
Okay, so you also have the
And read it for
opportunity
free.
to go holographic and do it for free.
Yes, definitely.
That sounds like a better answer.
Sign and
Right.
They're
I mean, for
professional
some.
people. Let's not forget, teachers are professionals.
Yes, they are.
And would probably want to seek advice when creating their will. Even if they end up writing it themselves, would probably still want to seek a professional.
Right, you wanna consult
Yeah.
consult someone in legal to make sure that you did it right?
And make sure you include everything
Yeah.
that you should.
Right,
Makes sense.
I understand. Any other questions that we have from the audience?
I have a question.
All right.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. A lot of people get confused, like when their grandmother or mother dies in the house, in grandparents' name, and then there's a tax sale, or they begin to, do things with the property, but they have not transferred title. Can you talk about the importance of opening successions and having titles transferred
Yes.
in the name of the heirs?
That was one of the #1 issues that happened in 2005 after Katrina. We had a ton of properties, a lot of properties in this city where we as black people, we tend to just, how should I say, the property goes down from family member to family member to family member. But no one knows and understands that you actually have to do a succession in order for that property to be put in their name. So one of the things that you'll have to do is, if it was your grandfather and grandmother's property, and now you're the grandchild, or if your mother is still alive, you would have to do the succession for both your mother, your grandfather, and your grandmother, because what happens is when your grandfather died, his 50% went to the children, and the grandmother kept her 50%. And then when she died, her 50% went remainder to the children. But in the interim, some of those children or the siblings died, so then their children then inherit the property. So it goes on and on and on. And so one of the things that a lot of people ran into was that they had to do successions for all of those people in order to get the property into the current owner's name. But if we do it when grandfather died, and we do it when grandmother died, and the next person died, then it goes much smoother. Because what we found during Katrina is some of these people have been dead for ages. I mean, years and years. So we had problems with getting, but they did have solutions, because they did do what we call a small succession affidavit. If you have property that's under $125,000, and if the person had been dead at least 30 years, you didn't need, it doesn't matter how much the property costs. You can do a small succession affidavit and transfer the property. So if you had somebody who had been on the property 30 years, and the property was worth 300 to 400, anything over 125, you could easily still consider it to do a small succession affidavit and file that in land records instead of having to actually go to court. But it's very important that we close succession, we open succession and close succession every time someone dies, so that we can keep up and make sure that the property is in the proper owners. Because if not, and taxes are not paid, people are losing their property due to tax sales.
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask this for my viewers. So for people who have yet to buy a piece of property, they may not even know what a succession is. Can you explain that to them?
Succession is basically when someone dies, it's basically your, what do we call it? It's what happens when you die. You open up succession to transfer property from one owner, from the deceased to the heirs. And if you have a will, you're considered as a legatee. If you don't have a will, you're considered as an heir, because it's called intestate law and testate law. Testate means you have a will, intestate means you don't have a will. And when you don't have a will, the law tells you who inherits. So if you die without a will and you have 5 children, each child will have 1/5 interest in your estate. But if you have a will, you can determine if you want to leave everything to all your children, or what you want to leave to each child. But if you don't have a will, you won't have any say, because the law speaks to who would inherit from you. So that's why it's important to have a will.
Got it, guys. We are getting a lot of information on tonight. I hope y'all are taking notes. You want to continue?
Okay. Another thing I want to talk to you about is trust. A lot of people especially trusts are important if you have, say for instance, if you have a piece of property that you want to keep in the family. One of the things you can do is put it into a trust. And that, when you have a trust, you don't have to actually open a succession. Because when you die, the trust document speaks for you. So that the property automatically transfers to the trustee, and the trustee is responsible for taking care of the property at that point. It can remain in the family, and the trustee will be responsible for paying the taxes, the insurance, and so forth. That's just one of the ways that we can use a trust. Instead, if you don't want to, you want to avoid probate, you can put your property, your assets into a trust. The trust you can have private real estate, you can put your bank accounts in there, you can put your stocks, your money markets, you can put all of it under one umbrella. And then you can basically, the people who are the beneficiary of the trust is the people who you say who are gonna benefit. You can say it's your children, you can make it your grandchildren, your wife, and so forth. So it's an easier way so that you can avoid going to probate is to actually just set up everything in a trust. When you die, it would basically, your trustee would be responsible for overseeing the trust.
And how do you set up a trust?
You can set up a trust. What you do would go, basically I would suggest going to an attorney because they have to draft a trust agreement. And the trust agreement would basically set up the trust. It would tell who the beneficiaries of the trust are and what assets you want to include in the trust. And we have two types of trusts. We have a revocable trust, which means that you can change it at any time. And then you have an irrevocable trust, which means that once the trust starts, you cannot change it. There are no changes, it's done. So if you put property into an irrevocable trust, then it's permanent. But if you do it in a revocable trust, you can always make changes to it. And the big difference between having a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust is that the irrevocable creditors can't get to it. So if you become, bankrupt or if you have any credit issues, the creditors can't get to the trust because it's irrevocable and you're no longer over it. The trustee is. You don't have access to the trust. But however, if you have a revocable trust, then the assets or the creditors can get to it.
Got it. Okay, we have one more question in the back.
So you're telling me if you have a whole estate, like your bank account, property consists of oil, mineral, and gas, and if you put it in an irrevocable trust, and you name your niece, or your nephews to that trust, nobody can touch that but them?
Right. You can make whoever you want the beneficiary of your trust. But if you make it irrevocable, then you can't touch it at all. It's no longer under your purview. It's under the trustee's purview, and they're the ones who hold it.
Executor over a trust, is that the same thing as a trustee?
I'm sorry?
The
Executor over a trust.
No, a trustee is over a trust.
Okay.
Executor is the person that is over your succession or your estate, over your estate. And you name the executor of your estate in your will.
Yeah, because of the time.
So you get to choose
Can they be both?
the trustee and it's two different instruments. One is your trustee and one is your executor. If you want to make your executor and your trustee the same, you can.
All right. Anything else you wanted to add? Or any other questions from my audience in regards to, okay. All right, well, I'm gonna move
On
forward.
behalf, no matter if it's good or bad or indifferent, we make sure that we have to speak, and that's how we, kind of uphold our race. However, they don't have to. They are allowed the individuality. The next one, I can worry about racism without being seen as self-interested or self-seeking. Another one, I will feel welcome and normal in the usual walks of public life, institutional and social. I like that one because I always give the elevator scenario. How often do people grab their purses when people of color are in an elevator or an enclosed space? I do not have to educate my children to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. This was one that really hit me in 2020. It really kind of, give me just a second. Really kind of making people understand why protection from law enforcement without them having an authoritative figure to kind of oversee a checks and balance. See, when we, I can only speak for myself, I'm a mother.
we definitely have to teach our children the proper ways that we have to go into society, how we need to be accepted in society. And that's a big difference from our white counterparts. Now, is it everyone's fault because of it? No, it's not. It's just an actual difference that everyone kind of deals with. Another one, if I have low credibility as a leader, I can be sure that my race is not the problem. How often do we look at a person that says something and it could be absolutely asinine, and yet they will identify it because of that race? Another one, if my day, week, or year is going badly, I need not ask of each negative episode or situation whether it had racial overtones. That was one I see a lot on CNN. Next slide. Review. So what is systemic racism? NAACP President Derek Johnson defined systemic racism, also called structural racism or institutional racism, as systems and structures that have procedures or processes that disadvantages African Americans. Glenn Harris, president of Race Forward and publisher of Color Lines, defined it as the complex interaction of culture, policy, and institutions. Let me repeat that one more time. The complex interaction of culture, policy, and institutions that holds in place the outcomes we see in our lives. Systemic racism creates disparities in many success indicators. Repeat that one more time. Our success indicators, including wealth, the criminal justice system, employment, housing, healthcare, politics, and education. So these are practices in culture, policy, and institutions that hinder our success indicators in wealth, criminal justice system, employment, housing, healthcare, politics, and education. If that doesn't hit you, I don't know what will.
So we're saying it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's an actual system that is put in place to hinder us. Next slide, please. All right. So housing, if you want to think about systemic racism in housing, what are those? How about applications that include your race, right? Why does that need to be a qualification for an application? Banking, how often is that incorporated on what types of loan packages that you actually receive? That banking portion, that housing portion, directly affects your success indicator, and it can be an inhibitor from you attaining wealth and actually transferring that wealth to your family. All right, the criminal justice system. Let's go ahead and talk about Breonna Taylor. Why does that look a little bit different to where our justice system, it's not the same process for our counterparts? Seems like it moves a little bit faster. Education. What are some systemic issues? We live in New Orleans. I can definitely tell you when you're looking across certain educational facilities, specifically those that have a larger proportion of African American students versus those that have a larger proportion of white students, you see more technology-based education. You should ask why. Public health. Public health and the way things are treated especially for African American, I'm going to say specifically African American females. I can tell you African American females at a younger rate are offered birth control pills and things that are altering our actual bodies at an early age that are not offered to our white counterparts. So when we talk about systemic, it's ongoing racial iniquities maintained by society. Institutional, these are discriminatory policies and practices within organizations and institutions. Interpersonal, that is the bigotry and biases shown between individuals through words and actions. Internalized, and just to give you an example of interpersonal, see, when we talk about systemic, we can see the portions in the system, we can see what's happening in actual institutions, but the interpersonal, let me give you an example of an interpersonal. When you go on a job, should you be asked whether or not you're married for a job interview?
No.
We are asked at a higher rate. Interpersonal. Off the record. Internalize race-based beliefs and feelings within individuals. So internalize, what does that mean? So when you look at certain low-income properties, why is there an internalized feeling that the people, the residents that live there do not care about the property? No one ever says maybe we need to do trash pickup more frequently. No one gives another solution regarding it. It's an internalized feeling that you don't care. And they actually create the biases and bigotry based upon that. Whereas if you go to a higher income neighborhood, they'll go ahead and they'll make an extra trash cycle. They'll fix whatever the problem is. But automatically, lower income, those areas that have a larger minority base, you don't care. Next slide, please. Employment. There are 500 CEOs, Fortune 500 CEOs that are Black. Let me say it again. Wow. There are 4 Fortune 500 CEOs that are Black. All right.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
I don't have a microphone to go 4 out of 5.
Big wow.
Okay.
Everyone in the audience says wow.
Wow. 4 out
Okay.
of 500.
Black.
And they're all male.
Okay.
Wow.
All right. Blacks have the Black unemployment rate is amongst the highest. Of course, Hispanic is a little bit higher than ours. So what should this actually tell us? Does this not tell us that maybe the system itself is not built for us to dive in trying to gain the employment or trying to become a CEO of a company versus making our own? What has deterred us from making our own, creating our own? Why are we scared to change that narrative? Next slide, please. When it comes to professional and managerial employment, we're still amongst the lowest, all right? When it comes to CEOs, we're still not doing well. Why are we not creating our own? If the system is constantly telling us, the numbers are telling us that we're not gonna hire you at that particular rate. It's not built for you, right? So out of all the Fortune 500, we're only gonna pick 4 of you. All right, next slide. In home ownership, what you were saying, dealing with, as far as successions, wills, and stuff like that, home ownership. What are the hurdles that come with home ownership? Now, when grandma and granddaddy were able to purchase a home, it was a little bit easier, but now when it comes to securing a loan or securing the actual money that is needed, it's a little bit harder as far as the hurdles that are, that you have to jump through. But home ownership, what do we need to do to fix things within the system? If we have black banks, why are we not receiving our loan packages from black banks that will actually favor home ownership? Next slide, please. Criminal justice, this one, there's so many layers in this. I can tell you honestly, when you go to law school, I think criminal justice, criminal procedure was the most disheartening portion of learning law. It's not in favor of us. From the moment that you have an actual, from you being stopped, or you going to the court system, the times, the delays, the responses, the amount of money that you have to put out, all of those things create a hurdle which automatically will put you in a position of guilt. We talked about earlier, even when it comes to the peers, the jury of your peers, it's not set up so that you have an actual pool of your peers. So what can we do? During COVID-19, before I go on, we have to use this as an opportunity to change the system, because this is the weakest that the system has ever been. And because it's the weakest right now, we have to take that opportunity and poke holes in it and say, this does not work. If there is not a jury of my peers, how can we make sure there is one for everyone that is out there? Right? $25 a day. How many people does that supplement your income for that particular day? 0. Is that not a slap in the face? Does that deter you from even going and showing up? All right. These all add to it. So when they start throwing those numbers of how many people are actually incarcerated, think about the jury pool. Think about the process. Think about the delays. Think about the money that someone had to actually spend. And then ask yourself, were they guilty until proven innocent, or innocent until proven guilty? Next slide, please. Undoing the system. Like I said, I am an educator.
Power.
We're gonna have power issues.
Keep going.
That was my last slide. But really, what this all boils down to is knowledge and opportunity. It's about innovation. We have a lot of weaknesses in the system. I wanted to tell you guys, it's about re-educating these issues, and teaching our young people that are coming behind us how to actually be successful, not with a heavy dependency on the government and on the system. If we do not start relying on ourselves, if we do not start sowing into ourselves, I'm actually a member of a phenomenal group. It's called NOLA Black Wall Street. And what it is about, that is about actually taking membership dollars, pooling it together, putting it back into businesses, and then sowing into the community, and then educating while also creating resource opportunities. We have to start creating more systems like that. You know, even if this has to be a model, something that we, make sure that we strengthen, we get all the kinks and the bugs out of it, but we have to figure out how we're gonna create our own ecosystem of putting back into us. If we don't, and we keep putting this heavy dependency, because COVID will show you, you could be heavily dependent on the government.
Yes, it can.
Okay? But is that what they want?
No.
Is it easier to ration you your food? Is it easier to ration you a paycheck and keep you bottled up and put here? Because a lot of times that lifestyle that you once lived, you may not be able to afford it on a $1,200 check or a $600 a week, unemployment income check or whatever. That's gonna further marginalize the haves versus the have-nots. But if we take this opportunity to start really creating more systems for ourselves and actually defeat the system in systemic racism and really start uniting, and I know people don't like to unite, I understand, and you can't unite everyone. Yes, you can't unite everyone. Everyone is not gonna go with you. But at the same time, we have to start somewhere. So that's pretty much all I have as far as systemic racism. Like I said, I am an educator by trade. I love teaching our young people. I love telling them about technology. Technology is really one of the keys to independence. It's the key to independence because even when it comes to money, there's cryptocurrency, there's cybersecurity, there's so many opportunities just for them to rely more on self. So that's where my passion actually lies. Michael, is there something else I should be saying?
Do we have any questions from the audience about systemic racism or questions from offline?
One of your slides that you had up there concerning the Fortune 500 and black ownership, because society paints this picture, even within our culture, we have all these rich and wealthy black people. So my question would be, where's this poll coming from? Because if you're gonna tell me out of so many Fortune 500 companies, we only got 4 black male owners, where's the rest of the pool that we're viewing day in and day out, which are trying to teach us, look, you need to invest in yourself. You need to educate yourself. You need to create something that's gonna outlive you. But based on the slide that you show us, we're missing a big old percentage in the gap. So somewhere. No, that's what I was asking her.
Yeah.
So you say Fortune 500, what qualifies as a Fortune 500? Because I don't know.
Okay, so when it comes to Fortune 500 companies, they are selecting companies such as like Walmart or, there's not a black CEO, but yes, it's those major companies. It's not just CEO, but it's those major companies that usually hit the Forbes list, and that's the ones.
And they have to meet certain revenue.
Yes, they have to meet.
It's based on their revenue requirement.
Yes, and one of the things that I find that seems to be a little disheartening, we're all really fighting to make it to the top, but a lot of times when people get to the top, it's how you actually look back down and pull your people back up. You know what I'm saying? And not just in name only. A lot of times it's your action. A lot of times it's not just the check that comes, writing. It's actually telling them what the cycle is. It's actually hiring people within your company to ensure that they can actually follow behind you. And a lot of times we miss that mark. We're so hungry to make it. We're so thirsty just to be successful that we forget there's a legacy that's got to come behind you. Obviously, we can't take it because we need a will. So
right.
But I will say, I'm gonna use myself as an example. I went to work for Deloitte & Touche, which is one of the top accounting firms in the country. And when I was hired, I was the only one that looked like me. I had no one that I could look to the left or to the right. I came in and I had to basically figure it out myself. But my sister, who also graduated from law school, I got an LLM in taxation, so I'm a tax attorney. And there was a young lady who finished from Southern Law School,
who was in law school at, Southern Methodist. Well, I wound up hiring her to come and work with me at the firm. So we have to look out for us, because, you know, once you're in there, that's exactly what you should be doing. You should be reaching back and bringing someone else with you. And to the day, she's still there.
What's so amazing about it is, if you go to some of these companies, and they have the good old boy system, they definitely reach back. They definitely reach back. They definitely get people that look like them, and they don't have to have the qualifications. They'll literally reach back just because you're cool with them. So we need to be more proactive. Yeah, you have to be more proactive in saying, this is not just a temporary thing. I am gonna create a lifestyle of changing my community, my Black community. I'm gonna be proactive. When I say proactive, I'm gonna make it a point to buy Black. I'm gonna make it a point to sit down with someone that is younger than me and tell them, this is how you go ahead and do it. If you see somebody that's in the same arena as you, you offer that assistance. Write recommendation letters. Pull them in any form or fashion. And you have to wake up with a mindset and say, this is not the government's problem. This is not the world's problem. This is not this person over here's problem. You are mine. This is my problem.
Right. Own it.
So,
Own it. Well, I don't think we have any more questions from the audience, but I definitely want to say thank you so much for such an informative night. Ms. Jenkins, Ms. Thomas, Ms. Harrison, you all gave us pages full of information that we can take with us and use for ourselves. Like you said, this is for us, and so we need to make sure that we're sticking to us, making sure that we're looking back and giving back to our children, not relying solely on the systems that are built, because if we can't see, if you haven't seen it yet, it's not for us, y'all. So thank you so much to our panelists on tonight. Thank you so much for Mr. Michael Lewis for beginning this conversation series. I think he's gonna close us off, guys, with his final remarks of the night.
Thank you, God bless. Now, with all sincerity, I'd like to thank you, wonderful women, for actually taking part this evening. This is more than what I can ever dream this had been, the transparency, the clarity. I started this off telling you all, pen and paper in hand. I don't care how old you are, you're never too old to learn. And quite frankly, I've learned a lot. I cannot wait to actually go back on this material and look at it some more. It starts with being humble and being honest with yourself. As I sat down, and this is the inaugural forum that I created, I took down some notes on how I can improve this product for you all that are viewers. And one of those things, I will create a Versus Instagram account later on today, so specifically that information can be funneled through those channels. I also will invest in a digital camera to actually record it continuously, so we don't have interruptions from Instagram limiting us for 1 hour. But these are things that you live and you learn. And in order for us to grow, we have to be humble enough to be honest with ourselves to say, this is where I messed up at, let me learn from that and go forward. Need to go right down the wheel today with Judge Jenkins. But in any case, just gonna close with, again, thank you all for viewing. Shalice is running for judge. We're gonna do a commercial real quick, that you speak on what our position in judge, and because you're actually covering both the East Bank of Orleans and the West Bank of Orleans. So I'm gonna let you speak on that briefly.
Yes, I'm running for Civil District Court, Division G in New Orleans. It's a citywide race. The election is November 3rd, and early voting is October 20th through October 27th. And I really need you to go out and support me. My number is number 78, because I know a lot of people like to have the number. So again, my name is Shalice Harrison, and my number is 78 on the ballot. Thanks.
All right, so you heard it. You can see she's a plethora of information and be an asset. And as I recall our conversation off camera, you're the person that's been on the bench now has been there for over 30 plus years.
Almost 40.
So yes, so she will be running against or replacing someone that has been on the bench for 40 something odd years, going back to the systemic racism and just who's in charge of those things. We need people like us to actually oversee systems like that. If I recall, Judge Jenkins herself is number 48. She's running for Louisiana Supreme Court Justice in our district. Right now, there are 7 districts total in Louisiana, and this is hers. Wish she was here to talk about it, but from what her and I spoke off camera about is there are 6 white males who preside over the Louisiana Supreme Court, and she's running against 2 other African American women. So what that basically means, we will have representation finally of a person of color as well as a woman, no matter what. It's 3 different women, but Judge Jenkins is number 48, and this is my moderator, Drea, Ask Ms. Heard. You all can follow her there. And we have our advocate, educator. I'm about to call you Angela Davis. I thought she was gonna stand up and just. I said Kimmy about to go off, but Kimmy, how can he follow you on IG and stuff?
It's Kimmy Talk, KIMMIETALK.
All right. So again, I thank you, women, for taking the time and making this dream of mine come true in a short period of time. I literally called y'all up the day that I thought about it. So, and I was like, this is the day that I'm doing it, and y'all was for it. So I thank you all. Signing off. Y'all have a great evening.